Well, look, I want to welcome everybody to this session for the fourth and final cohort of the STAAARS Plus Fellows under the current edition of PRCI. Very happy to welcome back two centers that have their second and I think third teams in STAARS Plus. This is Mopata out of Malawi and EPRC out of Uganda. Very happy to see these centers that have been able to compete successfully on more than one occasion to get into STAARS Plus. Very pleased with that, and also very pleased to have two new centers, CSIR in Ghana with Edward Marte, Justina Adwoa Onuma, and Frank Adusapoko. I guess Frank is not on the call as far as I can see right now, but okay.
Please, I'm here.
You are there. Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay, I see you under Justina's screen, but that's great. Thank you for joining, Frank. All right. And then from NICER in Nigeria, Ibukun James Olaoye and Sarah Edewore. Okay, and hope I'm saying your names approximately correctly. So thank you so much for joining. I think we've got some great topics here. And looking forward to listening to your presentation. I'm sure that you're very much into the analysis already. Looking forward to seeing how you present this. Looking forward to kind of the way you couch the research questions as research questions and the way you contextualize them in terms of their policy import as well, and the possible policy implications of what you're going to do. Okay, I will, with that, I will simply step away. Kelsey, I'm not sure who should be starting first. Do you have a defined order for this?
Yep, so we're going to lead off with our CSIR team from Ghana.
Great. And the setup, Kelsey, is how much time for presentation and then discussion?
So each team has 15 minutes to present and 5 minutes of Q&A.
15 and 5, okay.
Yep.
All right, excellent. All right, well, we'll have CSR take it away. Thank you.
I think that we might need to get permissions to share screens.
Sure.
Yeah.
There we go. Can you try now?
Sure. Now it's. Is it clear enough?
Yes.
Yep, looks good.
All right. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, senior colleagues, and fellow from different countries around the world. It's an opportunity for us to present our research ideas and our preliminary findings. So to do that on behalf of the CSIR team, my name is Edward Marte, and the title of our presentation is Seasonal Food Price, Welfare Outcomes, and the Mediating Role of Access to Markets in Ghana. As a way of introduction, realize that there's a lot of, food insecurity around the world, which can be attributed to several factors, especially where you have smallholder farmers that are into rain-fed agriculture, as compared to other developed countries where they use, irrigation. So this really have impact on the amount of food that is produced annually. And also in Ghana, the situation is not the same. There is a high call for countries to become more sustainable in terms of, food production, as espoused in the Sustainable Development Goal. But still, Ghana has a long way to go, though there have been a significant improvement in terms of, food production. Yet, a lot of the farmers or the smallholder farmers continue to produce on a smaller basis and also use traditional methods as opposed to improve, technologies. And this all has impact on the quantity of food that is produced. And there is a number of, moderately or severely food insecure people in Ghana. It's also increasing, especially the statistics tells us that about 10.7 million to 11.4 million people between the period of just 2014 to 2016 are food insecure. So this is a call to development, partners as well as government to take action in order to reduce the extent of people becoming malnutrition. Then also, in case of, in terms of our studies that we are carrying out, realize that, a lot of studies have actually been done regarding price shock, price volatility, market access, how they all influence food insecurity and household dietary diversity score. However, per our study, we realized that there's only one study that actually falls almost in line with what we are also trying to do, and that is Amoliba et al. 2023, who happened to be a STAAR fellow, which we have been in contact with him for some time now, based on the our research idea that we are trying to espouse here. However, in terms of the place of departure for our study, we focus more on market access, how market access actually mediates the role of food, welfare outcomes. So do individuals, if they have access to market, will they be able to buy all the diversified food that is sold in the market, as opposed to those who do not have, access to market? Are they also limited in terms of the food items that they are able to buy? And if that is the case, then that tends to influence the, their household dietary diversity score, as well as the, their food insecurity, and which in the long run may also have an impact on their health expenditure. So in terms of our research questions, we have two main research questions that we want to address per this presentation. One, is there an association between seasonal food prices, food security, and health expenditure in Ghana? Then secondly, do access to market mediate the effect of seasonal food prices on food security and health expenditure in Ghana? So forming our hypothesis based on the questions that we have stated, one, food price seasonality has an effect on food security and health expenditure. Then the second hypothesis, market access plays a mediating role in the effect of seasonal food prices on food security and health expenditure. So in case of our methodology, our data basically comes from the socioeconomic panel data, which we obtained from ISE, who happens to be an institution within the University of Ghana, and it's a collaboration between them and Yale University and other institutions. So we are using the three waves of the panel data, and currently the fourth wave is being collected. But due to the tight schedule that we have, we only have access to the three waves of the data. So our study is basically going to be on those three waves. And apart from that too, we also have geocodes of the output markets, and we try to link the farmers' geocodes to the farm geocodes in order to get the distance from the homestead to the farm. And we also obtain monthly data prices of maize and rice. So basically for the rice, we had the imported price, the monthly imported rice over a period of time. Then also we did the same thing for maize, but for the maize, it's based on the local maize production within a country. Due to the panel nature of our data, we intend to explore the fixed effect model. So we'll be looking at the household fixed effect model, whilst controlling for seasonality, controlling for district fixed effect, and also at least the error term there. So basically our model looks at how food insecurity, we regress food insecurity on seasonality, volatility, and the D represents, covariates, that's other controls that we will be controlling for in the model. So basically, we are also looking at imported rice and local maize production. So that is why we have the superscript G on top of the parameters, as well as the variable of interest. So as defined, so the left-hand variable is the food security status, as well as the health expenditure. And as I've said earlier on, the two items that we are considering is imported rice and maize. So that's how we define our variables. So there's the seasonal food price deviation, and there's the price volatility. So the same thing, the error term is also, how do you call it, defined here, as well as the seasonal fixed effect, the household fixed effect, as I have mentioned earlier on, and the vector of control variables. So apart from just trying to regress food security on seasonality as well as volatility, we are also looking at how we can interact market access with the seasonality, as well as market access with the volatility. Then beyond that, we'll also interact our seasonality with the household type. Either they are a net seller or they are a net buyer. So we want to do that to kind of estimate, the heterogeneity in terms of the food security indicators, as we have indicated. So this equation 2 actually talks about the interactive terms between the seasonality, volatility variables, and the market access and household type. So our equation 2 will be repeated for the share of purchased food expenditure to total consumption expenditure. Basically, we are looking at 3 main outcome variables. That's the food security. We are looking at food expenditure, and we are also looking at health expenditure. So measurement of our outcome variable. So the food security will be measured in terms of the household dietary diversity score. We also look at the share of purchased, produced, and received food per total household expenditure. And one novelty with this particular data that we have is that when they are asking questions about the household dietary diversity score, they ask those questions based on food that is produced within the household. They do similar thing based on purchased food, as well as food that is received as a form of gift. So we try to also characterize our household dietary diversity based on production, food that is produced solely within the household, then food that is actually purchased, and we actually left the one that they receive as gift, because we didn't have so much variation in that particular data. In terms of the household health expenditure too, we're also looking at all expenditures, the health expenditures incurred by the household. That is the out-of-pocket expenditure. So we have not really done a very deep empirics, because we're still trying to clean a bit of the data. But however, for the purpose of this discussion, we try to present our preliminary results. Now we are trying to look at the patterns within the data. So just to get a visual representation of how our data looks like. So wherever you have first, it tells you that that's the first wave, the second wave, and the third wave. So if you compare across waves, you realize that the share of food that is produced within the household has been increasing since 2009 to 2015. That is the third wave. So similarly, you realize that the share of purchased food also, that is the mean of the share food bought legend that I have there, that one too has also been increased. So clearly, share of food produced and share of food purchased by households has been increasing over the period of the survey. Now here we also look at the household dietary diversity score based on based on the period of data collection. So we also have the first wave, the second wave, and the third wave. And when you look at the household dietary diversity score based on purchased food, you realize that there has been an increment over the years. Similarly, when you also look at the household dietary diversity score computed based on produced food within the household, you also realize that there has also been an increase over the years. So between period 2008 all over to the third wave when the data was collected, HDDS has also been increasing. And that is a good sign that at least we are making a bit of gains. However, the question is, how can we sustain the gains, and how does seasonality and the volatility of food prices further decreases the HDDS? Or so basically that is what our study tries to do now, despite the improvement that we've seen over the years. Now we try to also do the same thing for the household dietary diversity score based on whether the household is a net seller or the household is a net buyer. And we realize that for the households that are net seller, their HDDS based on purchased food is very high as compared to the net buyers, who basically, buy more food, from their production level is very low. And when you compare the produced also as well, you realize that the net buyers to their HDDS is relatively higher as compared to the net sellers. So trying to disaggregate, our results or the HDDS based on produced and purchased food actually reveals interesting, patterns within our data, which I think really makes this particular study interesting as compared to, previous study who actually did not disaggregate their data based on whether the HDDS is based on purchased food or based on produced food. Now, we also look at our health expenditure. So on amounts that the household spend on health expenditure, and realize that net buyers tends to incur more expenditure in terms of the out-of-pocket expenditures that they incur on health as compared to the net sellers, who have a relatively lower health expenditure compared to the net buyers. And there's something I need to also highlight here, that with a net seller, because they are able to sell their surplus that they produced, so in other words, they tend to have relatively, higher income compared to the net buyers. And the literature has also shown that, wealthier households tend to be more proactive in terms of taking care of their health. So they try to undertake preventive measures as opposed to, poorer households who would rather wait for the disease to, strike before they rather incur a lot of, cost on that. So that is why you see the differences in terms of the health expenditure across the household types. Here, we try to also present the seasonal maize price, and you could clearly see that from 2009 to 2019, that is the third wave, you realize that seasonality in terms of maize price has been fluctuating over the period. So there are times where you experience high price, there are times too where you experience low price. So it tells you clearly that, there is high seasonality in terms of, the maize production within the country. And if a particular country is experiencing high seasonality, then it tends to affect, household dietary diversity score as to the amount of maize that the household can actually buy, or whether there's going to be a substitution effect. Household may be moving away from maize, perhaps maybe buying something else that is more, maybe in terms of the seasonality is a bit lower. So, they can afford it. Now, we did the same thing for imported rice. And imported rice, you could see that, the seasonality is more even sharper as compared to the maize one. There are times where, you experience a very sharp variation in terms of the imported rice. And this is, a classical case in Ghana where there's so much, I mean, importation of rice, and it tends to compete with the local rice. And there's high demand too for the imported rice because people have actually acquired, I mean, taste for, I mean, foreign product as compared to the local rice production. So due to the high demand too, prices also tend to be very high. However, currently there is a bit of, I mean, a sensitization, awareness creation for people to eat more of the local rice. So, I mean, with the imported rice too, you also find a lot of seasonality in there. So basically that is with the summary of our, I mean, our results. So the next step for us to do is to clean some sections of the data, as I've stated earlier on, and also to engage more with our mentors, because we needed to be very clear on some of the, I mean, the interactions that we want to do. And I mean, Friday we'll be meeting with our mentors to share, I mean, some of the results that we've done so far to kind of maybe provide us with more insight or direction as to how we should go about it. And we need to also be able to explain very well, I mean, the coefficient sign that we are actually getting to. So basically, I mean, after Friday, we will be able to be able to firm up our regression results, and perhaps maybe our next presentation, we will share more of our results with our colleagues and our senior colleagues as well. And we shall run the regression as I've I mean, stated as well. So in terms of acknowledgement, we want to acknowledge these people who have really helped us to collect, I mean, the data. Thank you very much. And we are open for questions and discussion to improve our work. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Edward. Thank you very much. So there's quite a lot to unpack here, not time today to do all of the unpacking. Nicely presented. Thank you for that. I do have a number of questions. I'll send some comments to you by email, but could you, for now, let me first just check my understanding. You are using monthly price data, so you do have seasonality of prices. However, your survey data is, you know, is essentially giving you yearly average data for, or total data for health expenditures, and kind of a yearly average dietary diversity score. Correct? So you've got seasonal price data, but yearly average for your left-hand side variables. Is that correct?
That's correct. You're right.
So you're estimating the seasonality of prices, the impact of the seasonality of prices on kind of average annual food security status. So, okay, I guess that's fine. That's the data you have, and you can't change the data you have. Just need to be clear on that.
All right.
Can you go back to figure 1?
All right.
So I don't really understand this figure. You show that in the first round, about 5%, if I'm interpreting correctly, of food that was consumed came from production, and 9.5% came from purchases.
Sure.
So, okay, so I'm interpreting that correctly. So that means you're only accounting for 14 to 15% of all food consumption between production and purchases, which seems tremendously low to me. The implication would be that the rest came from food received, but that seems quite unlikely to me. So could you explain the meaning of those numbers a bit?
Sure. So yes, it is not so. It's the share of so that's the share of food, I mean, produced. So we are actually finding the proportion based on the total household expenditure. So it is not a proportion of the total food, I mean, produced and purchased, as well as gift. So it's like a ratio of the food that is produced within the household over the total household expenditure, which consists of food and non-food items. So that is why the ratio there seems to be very, very small.
Okay, so in the first round, then,
yeah,
you're saying that as a share of total household expenditure on food and non-food,
Yeah,
5% of that expenditure was produced food, and
Sure.
9.5% was purchased food.
sure.
And then this
Yeah.
rise is quite dramatically up to 12 and 23. So, 35% total, and then to 16 and 28. That's quite a, what's the time period on this from first to third wave?
Yeah, so from first is 2009.
It's 4 years,
Yes, yes. And
4 years
Right.
interval.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I would just say that, first of all, the first wave, you're saying basically the implication, assuming that food received was a very small share, which typically it is, right?
Yeah.
What you're saying is that only 14%, 14 to 15% of total household expenditure was on food, which strikes me as impossibly low for households like this. They're going to be spending far more of their total expenditure on food than 14 or 15%. Number one. Number two, for that share, let's even assume that the 14% is correct in the first wave, and I see Kelsey encouraging me to move on. For that to have risen to 45% in the third wave is simply not, does not seem credible to me. So I'm going to end now. I'm
Okay.
gonna let us move on, but I'm sure you're going to be discussing this with your mentors. So yeah, this basic data needs to be looked at very carefully to make sure that it all makes sense. So I'm sorry, we have to move on here. I raised some fundamental issues. I'll send you further comments after I've gone through your proposal, Edward, but thank you for the presentation. And I know you're going to do great work over the next several months. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay,
Can I
Kelsey.
stop sharing now?
Yeah, thank you. We can move on, Kelsey.
Sorry, Dave, I just want to keep us to our schedule.
Yes,
not
I know.
Hold people over too long, but let's move now to our nicer team. So this is Abukun and Sarah.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Let me share my screen. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So I'll be presenting for the team. I am Sarah Dewo, and my fellow colleague is Ibukun James Olaoye. Our peer mentors and mentor are Tarana Chaham and David Stifel. So we'll be presenting on does crop diversification and improved seed use influence food security of smallholder farm households, evidence from Nigeria. As a background and motivation to our study, over the past few years, there's been effort made by the government to navigate or move the economy, diversify into non-oil sector, as the oil sector accounts for about 97% of Nigerian exports, and a higher portion of the GDP comes from the oil sector. So agriculture, as of 2021, contributes 22.4% to the Nigerian GDP. Nigeria is blessed with a large land mass as well as a large population, and the hectareage of arable land available in Nigeria is actually 70.8 million. And crop production actually accounts for 87.6% of the agriculture total output. Due to the high dependence of farmers, smallholder farmers, who are termed as farmers that actually cultivate less than 5 acres of land, due to the high dependence on rain-fed agriculture, they've been susceptible to a high level of shock, especially from the climate, as well as from other sources, other economic sources, such as from the death of their household head and other economic shocks. As a result of this, effort has been made to diversify or to move to climate-smart agricultural practices or sustainable practices that will actually increase their productivity. So this study basically tries to look at this these practices, which falls under sustainable practices, that's crop diversification and improved seeds. Crop diversification in this case actually refers to diversification into more than one crop, especially on a plot of land. Then improved seed use, we are trying to look at people that actually adopt improved seeds for cultivation from one period to the other. Based on this, we are going to examine this or answer this research questions. What drives crop diversification and improved technology use adoption among smallholder farmers? Then the second research question will be what drives food security status or smallholder farm households? What are the direct and combined effect of crop diversification and usage of improved seeds on food security of smallholder farming households in Nigeria? Then what are the direct and combined effects of crop diversification and usage of improved seeds on income of smallholder farming households in Nigeria? Our study hypothesis is that crop diversification and the adoption of improved seed technologies jointly influence income and food security of smallholder farming households significantly. In order to distinguish what we are doing from literature, we realize that over the years, several studies have considered the effect of crop diversification, as well as, in some cases, the use of improved seed. It's either they are done separately or jointly. But one of the study by Bayegui et al. 2022, it considered both practices in a state in Nigeria, that's Ogun State. But what we are trying to do is to look at this concept using panel data. And we have realized that from their study, they actually found that crop diversification actually and improved seed technology actually increases also crop productivity, income, food security, and nutrition. But we are trying to see what will be the combined effect of this crop diversification and improved seed technology on food security. Then our conceptual framework, we try to look at what is driving what. We all know that climate change has been in the news, and there has been so much effort by different governments all over to improve, to negate the effect of climate change. And a lot of countries, Nigeria especially, have several adaptive strategies that have been imbibed over time. In this case, we are trying to see what crop diversification will do, as well as the adoption of improved seed technologies. What will be the effect on mitigating the effect of climate change, as well as how this will affect farm productivity and ultimately result in increased yield and income, and its ultimate effect on food security of the household. Then, how do we intend to contribute? I already mentioned some of this before previously. Because limited evidence actually exists on the combined effect of both technologies, we are trying to look at what will happen if both technologies are combined, and we are moving from primary data to the use of panel data to see what is the changes that are happening over time. Then, as primary data is unable to handle endogeneity problem, we feel that the panel data will be able to do so. Then our data will be using panel data for 2 waves from the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. This data covers a total of 5,000 households, although there's been decline over the years due to migration and some other cases. So this data covers information on household and cultural data, as well as community level data. We have two rounds, post-planting and post-harvest, so we'll be having 4 periods of data to use. Then in order for us to analyze and achieve the objective of our study, to measure crop diversification, we'll be using the Simpson Diversity Index. It specified us where we know that the crop diversification itself shows a relationship between the proportionate area of the eye crop in the gross crop area and the total number of crops grown by the household. For us to take it a bit further, we decided not to limit it only to crop diversification and looking at the number of crops. We decided to look at the kind of synergy that is existing. Why are they choosing these crops? Is there a particular relationship? So we've decided to go further by looking at the fact whether they are diversifying because the particular crop is fixing the nitrogen in the soil, or probably a particular crop is nitrogen loving. So we've decided to move further and look at that particular aspect. Then for the food security, we'll be measuring food security using the household calorie consumption per capita and day. It's specified to us where the total weekly calorie consumption covers what's crops that were grown by the particular household, as well as the household spending on food that was purchased from outside. To take us a bit further, for our panel estimation to achieve the effect of crop diversification and improved seed use on food security and on income, we decided to estimate the panel regression. First and foremost, we are looking at a linear model where we are looking at the interaction between the left-hand side of the equation is showing the food security of income, while the right-hand side, we have the adoption of improved seed as well as the use of crop diversification, then the interaction between both. While in the panel regression, it takes note of the unobserved also specific fixed effects and the error term. Then in summary, given the recurrent exposure of smallholders in the Nigerian agricultural system to climate change and other shocks, there's a need to understand the combined effect of crop diversification and usage of improved seed on food security of these farmers. As we hypothesized that crop diversification and the adoption of improved seed technology will jointly influence the food security status of smallholder farming households by providing empirical evidence on their combined effect. Our expectation is that households that adopt improved seed and also diversify their crops will be able to enjoy higher incomes and food security. So we have some preliminary results. We had only done a little bit of descriptive statistics based on what we have in the data. It's still work in progress. So for the first result, it's just showing the use of improved seed across the two waves. And the result has shown that across the two waves, in terms of, we have various categories. The hybrid improved, although there were no clear delineation of what the hybrid was or what the improved was. So the assumption is they are one and the same thing, while the local and traditional, we believe, are one and the same thing. And we realized that for the wave 3, which was in 2015, improved seed basically contributes 9.2% to the total crops that was actually grown within that period. While in 2018, there was actually an increase to 7.36 in 2003. The same thing was replicable also under the cropping systems, where we had a breakdown into the intercropping and monocropping. We realized that there had been an increase in the use of in intercropping as compared to monocropping. Although a lot of farmers practice intercropping, there are still some crops in Nigeria that are grown solely alone. So we realized that there was an increase from 72% to 78.2% in 2018. Also, we wanted to look at the interaction between these two technologies, between these two periods. And we realized that improved seed technology actually increased over time, although for intercropping in 2015, there was a decline in the number of improved seeds that were grown on an intercrop field. There was a decline from 74.4% to 49.8% from intercropping, while for monocropping, there was actually an increase from 25.6% to 50.2%. So we've realized that some of these technologies, although reasons were given for why there was a choice of the use of the improved seedlings over the local seedlings, while there was carryover of the traditional seedlings to the next planting season. We believe that looking at this interaction will go a long way in telling us what is actually happening to households as they make decisions that affect their crops, as well as the decisions that affect their well-being. Thank you for your attention. We look forward to your contribution. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Yes, thank you very much for that presentation. As always, there's lots of issues to unpack with this, and there's not the time verbally to do that right now. I had a question similar to what Chris Barrett posted in the comments, which is simply asking what the units of measure are on the bar plots. Some of them seem to be perhaps number of plots, others seem to be different units, but you also spoke of percentages. So could you maybe go back just briefly to one of those plots, one of those bar graphs, explain what the units are? Yeah, we could just do that one, and that's about all the time we'll have before we'll need to move on to the next
Okay.
group, I think.
Okay, all right, thank you. So the number of the unit here was the number of crops grown for this, the number of crops grown.
The number
on
of
the plots.
crops.
Yes.
Okay. So the number of crops over the 5,000 sampled households.
Yes. Because a lot of them they were planting on different plots. So we have, if you look, you realize that the total, you have over 10,000, but because they had several plots. So whatever crop that was grown on the plots, some planted more than one crop. So if they actually adopted the use of several improved seeds on a particular crop, you have an increase in the number of crops grown per plot.
So this might be data at the plot crop level. So if a plot had 3 different crops on it, then there are 3 observations for that one plot for that household. Is that right?
Yes, that's true.
And you find a big increase in the use of local seeds and a big decrease in the use of traditional seeds. One additional clarifying question then, what's the difference between local and traditional?
Well, we believe it's the same thing because the same units were given in the questionnaire, but we did not want to just merge together or pull the data together and present it. That's why we're just leaving it at this stage. But from our discussion with our mentor, our intention is to actually pull together either hybrid and improved will combine as one, while local and traditional will be combined as a set.
Yeah, I would anticipate as well. And so these numbers, so it's a little bit hard to interpret those numbers because they're not in percentages. I think you spoke about percentages, but well, okay. Let me go quiet now. I don't know if there are other comments or questions from others from the floor. Okay, I see Christy asking, very limited use of hybrid and improved. Will this sample size be adequate to detect impact? Excellent question. You know, out of what looks like a total of 25,000 plot crop observations over the 2 rounds, you have only about 2,300, more or less than 10%. That were hybrid or improved. So Christy's asking, are there enough observations to find significant results? I don't know what, that you'll be speculating a bit. And of course you have to do the analysis to find that. But I guess the observation is that you'll have to, it may be difficult to find significant results given the very low level of use. Don't know if you have any response to that, Sarah.
So what we had tried to do as we began to work with the data with our mentors, we realized that there was this challenge. So we decided to look at data or the contextual analysis of this work from this angle by looking at crop diversification first. We wanted to see what was happening, who was diversifying, what was the degree of diversification, what's the kind of synergy. If it can address a lot of these questions, we may, at the end of the day, leave out improved seedlings because we do not have so much information on improved seedlings.
Right.
So we decided to interact so much with crop diversification because we have a lot of people intercropping. But instead
Yeah.
of just remaining at that level where we say, oh, they diversified, we just use an index. We're not just counting, we want to see what's the synergy. Are they diversifying because it's fixing nitrogen or it's a nitrogen loving crop? We're asking other questions to see if it will take crop diversification further than what has been done before.
Right. Okay, super. Okay, so we'll move on. I see Christy. Thanks, Sarah. These are very important questions, especially diversification that USAID is asking across the countries in which we are investing. So I look forward to the results. Excellent. Okay. Thank you, Christy, for that. Thank you, Sarah. And we'll move on.
Thank you
to the
very
next.
much.
Thank you.
Yep, so next up we have our Mwapata team there, already ready to go. Thanks for being so on top of it. So this is Anderson, Lamakazani, and Dina. We can see your screen, but we cannot hear you.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yep, sounds great.
All right, okay. Thank you. So yeah, our current working title is Gender Differences in the Adoption of Sustainable Agricultural Intensification Practices and Their Welfare Impacts. Basically, we are looking at 4 countries, Ethiopia, Malawi, Tanzania, and Uganda. And our mentors are Alexander Mchuda and Christine Davis, both of whom are not here because they have traveled. So in terms of the introduction, we know women play an important role in agriculture, and they contribute to food and nutrition security of households. However, despite the contribution they make, they face a number of challenges, which include limited access to capital endowments, such as land, livestock, farm inputs, and so on and so forth. And they also face chronic food insecurity. And from the literature, what we've seen is that these constraints may also limit the adoption of sustainable intensification practices, which, as a general definition, these involve innovations that seeks to improve yields or productivity without adversely impacting the environment and conservation of additional and agricultural land. Moving on, in terms of the motivation, in terms of the motivation, what we've also seen is that the adoption of SCIPs can improve nutritional status, and that has implications on household farm incomes and food security in general. However, there has been limited evidence to back this hypothesis, and this study is motivated by that. And as we'll see, in terms of the potential contributions that they will inform the adoption of SIPs. And we take a gender analysis on SIP adoption. What we've noticed from the literature is that several studies have used the sex of the household heads as an indicator of gender. However, we've seen from the literature as well that this may not be a good indicator of who makes the decisions in the household. And building on that, some studies have looked at gender differences by looking at the sex of the farmer at the plot management level. However, this may not be a reflection of who makes the decision. So studies have also improved on this by disaggregating the data set by gender into 3 categories. That's male decision maker, female, or joint decision makers. And that's the approach that we take in our study. We have 2 objectives. The first objective is to examine gender differences in the adoption of sustainable intensification practices. And the second one is to assess the effects of adopting SIPs on household welfare. And as we will see, we have 3 potential indicators. The first one is household consumption expenditure, which we use as an indicator of farm income. And on the food security, we have a number of indicators, one of which is the food insecurity experience scales. And on the food consumption indicator, we use the household dietary factors and also the food consumption scores. So in terms of the data, we use the data from the Living Standards Measurement Survey, integrated surveys on agriculture, collected between 2010 and 2017. And these are collected at various intervals for each of the countries. For example, Ethiopia, we have 3 webs. Malawi, we have 4 webs. Tanzania, we have 5 webs. And Uganda, we have 7 webs in between 2010 and 2017. So what we do is to pick 3 sets of webs from each of these countries, covering similar time periods. And why do we look at these 4 countries? Because these countries more generally are agro-based economies, and they employ more than 70% of the workforce in agriculture. And the land in these countries are affected by soil degradation. And there is also limited use of agricultural technologies. Coming in now to the data, what SIPs do we use? We have 3 groups. Number 1 is conservation agriculture, which will be assigned a value of 1 if either of these is adopted. And similarly for soil and water conservation, also assigned a value of 1 if either contour, bands, vertical glass, and terraces are adopted. And for organic agriculture, again assigned a value of 1, otherwise 0 if the farmers have adopted animal manure or compost manure. Moving on, in terms of the indicators, I did touch on this already, but I will just zoom in on the last one, which is the nutritional security. Basically to say that the main difference between the HTTS and the food consumption scores is that the food consumption scores includes the frequency of consumption, but also applies the weights according to the relative nutritional values of the various food groups that have been consumed. On the household consumption expenditure, I think there is a lot of discussion in the literature as to why household consumption expenditure is preferred. I think one of the chief is that this is less volatile compared to farm income. And this is particularly important for low-income countries, which we are looking at. Moving on in terms of the empirical strategy. So we use the multinomial endogenous switching regression, which is implemented in 2 stages. In the first stage, you run a multinomial logis regression, which is on the farmer's adoption of alternative SIPs. So the way we handle this is that you generate categorical variables, 0 if they are non-adopters, and 1 if they have adopted conservation agriculture, and 2 for soil and water conservation, 3 in organic fertilizer, and then the final one is the combinations of these. And in the second stage now, that's when now you estimate different models based on the outcome variables, which I mentioned include household consumption expenditure. That would be model number 1, and model number 2 on the household food insecurity, and then household dietary diversity scores, and the final model will be on the food consumption scores. So this is theoretically the approach that we are taking, and the model addresses selection bias. Basically, we are correcting for selection bias arising from both observed and unobserved heterogeneity of farmers endogenously self-selecting, and the subsequent decisions of adoption may be affected by unobserved factors that may be correlated with the outcome variables. So one of the indicators, which is the household food insecurity indicator, may be binary depending on how we construct it. And an alternative model is the multinomial endogenous treatment model, which can be extended for binary outcomes. But it's a similar approach to the multinomial endogenous switching regression model. In terms of the expected contributions of study, we hope to generate new evidence with respect to gender differences in the adoption of SIPs. Also to generate evidence with respect to the barriers of adoption and the effects of adoption on welfare outcomes. And these have a number of policy implications, which is very critical, especially if we are looking at evidence-based policy formulation. So the stage at which we are, we've claimed the data, more particularly for Malawi and Ethiopia, and we'll commence the analysis because we understand there will be one or two things with the data. So we want to start the analysis this week so that we take note of the glitches that may be there. But we have already discussed with our mentors and agreed on the approach to this estimation, including the do file. Yeah, so basically that's where we are. I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Anderson. Nicely presented, very clear, thanks. A question I had was about the classification of decision-making. You talked about female, male, or joint. Or do you have the data in these ISA surveys to make that classification at the plot level, for example, or is it a broad household level classification? Are you only able to do this at the household level?
Yeah, thank you so much. So we are able to do this at a plot level in terms of who makes a decision on the plot, and we've confirmed that on the data for both Malawi and Ethiopia that we've so far cleaned. Yeah.
Okay, so at plot level, so you might have multiple crops, but at least on a plot, but at least at plot level, you're able to make that classification. Okay, good. And then kind of picking up on Christie's observation about the previous presentation. So I haven't looked at this data for some time, but my sense from when I was looking at it is that the level of adoption of these practices is quite low. For example, there's been a great deal of interest in conservation agriculture, but persistently low levels of adoption of those. So do you have any sense? I know that you haven't gotten into the data yet, but again, if we have very low levels of adoption, then kind of statistically finding significant effects can be difficult. Do you know yet whether you're seeing, what kind of levels of adoption you're seeing of some of these practices?
Yeah, so I think Lemmy may wish to join on that one. But I think for some of these, for example, like organic fertilizer, in the context of Malawi, I think is relatively high. But I'm not so sure about soil and water conservation of course, we may have to look at that when we finalize the cleaning of the data for the other countries.
Sure. Okay, all right. Okay, well, clearly it's a very important topic with the contribution of ag and then land use change to climate change, for example. That's only one of the things that makes this such an important topic. Let me step back now. I don't see any other written comments or questions. Does anyone else have any questions or comments about this? Okay, great. I'll send additional comments written to you, Anderson, and your team based on the proposal, and look forward to how this evolves. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we can move on.
Okay, our last group is from EPRC. So we have Linda, Umar, and Pauline. I will also note for Mopata that Kristen is in this session. She made an appearance, so.
Yes, thank you, Kristen, in the midst of your travel.
Yes. I think the EPRC team is just getting ready to share their screen.
It's Kapanda Omal who's going to be sharing. I'm trying to access the document, the file. I've got a challenge with sharing. Can I share the document with you and you share, please?
I should be able to share, yes.
That would be great.
Is it the copy that's uploaded in Google Drive?
Yes. Most recent.
Okay, let me just get it downloaded. Okay, then you'll just let me know when you need to advance your slide.
Thank you so much, and greetings to all participants from Uganda. We are the Economic Policy Research Center team, which is composed of Dr. Linda Nakato, myself, and Pauline. We are being mentored by Professor Milu Mayanja and Molly Ingram. And our focus for the PRCI STAARS program is on credit access, input use, and food security using the evidence from Uganda. The next slide. So this will be our presentation outline, starting with the motivation, and we'll present some preliminary findings from the data we've analyzed. Next slide. Globally, looking at the prevalence of pests and the cause of pests, we see that over 35% of the potential yield on average is lost at the level of pre-harvest. And annually, food production loss is also at the rate of 45. And in the global sense, we come to realize that indeed pests contribute to food loss at different levels, which in the case of Uganda is seen both at pre-test, pre-harvest, and post-harvest. And this loss in a way leads to the reduction of food and access of food, increasing food insecurity. For the case of Uganda, according to the integrated food security phase classification, about 2.6 million people are experiencing food insecurity compared to 1.6 in 2017. But to remedy this situation or try to reduce on insecurity of food, partly as a result of pests or damage caused by pests, we came to realize that the access to and use of pesticides in Uganda is limited, seeing a 6% use, which is very low, and some of the factors that are attributed to the low use of pesticides in Uganda are costs of the pesticides and the access to credit, which are central to this study. Next slide. So to try and reduce the damage of pests in Uganda and increase access to food, reduce food insecurity, our study set out to understand what the determinants of pesticide use are in Uganda. The second one, we try to understand what the effects of pesticide use on food security in Uganda. The third is we are trying to understand how does credit access moderate the relationship between pesticide use on food security. And then lastly, we would like to understand the different sources of credit that matter for pesticide use and food security. Next slide. So related to the questions, we have two hypotheses. And the first one is we are trying to understand if there is a positive relationship between pesticide use and food security, which in our study, we believe this relationship does exist. And we also intend to assess and see if credit can access the use, can facilitate, enhance the use of pesticides and also increase on food security in Uganda. Next slide. So related to the focus of the study, which is on credit access, input use and food security, we came to realize that quite a lot of research has been done to explain aspects of food insecurity, but in particular, the first strand of literature talks about the choice of pesticide use, which is being affected by characteristics of household. And this was done by Reham. Other researchers try to explain the misuse and overuse, as well as application of pesticides indiscriminately. However, in Uganda, some of the literature that would have explained such situation of pesticide use is limited. And in relation to the pesticide use and food security, still some researchers are confirming that the use of pesticides in farming and food production, it can reduce on the insecurity of food. Next slide. However, the access or the purchasing power of farmers to use the pesticides depends on the access of credit. And several researchers confirm that the constraint of credit limits most of the farmers in subsistence level to access pesticides. Though access to credit was identified as one of the main features that can support farmers to use pesticides, literature confirms that most of the times credit associations provide such kind of support, and then banks are not readily available in areas, mostly rural communities. Some researchers confirm that informal credit from friends and family do support the access to credit and the use of pesticides. However, some other insights from other countries like Cameroon, Ghana, and Madagascar, as well as Malawi, confirm that most of the times the access to credit is for large farmers as opposed to subsistence farmers. While this is true, Hussein, in his research, he also confirms that access to credit can boost farmers' input. And related to the challenges that are connected to lack of access to credit by most of the rural communities who are the majority in Uganda in the subsistence sector, Many smallholder farmers in Uganda constitute 85% of farming community, and this in a way can confirm that access to credit becomes a very big challenge. Next slide. So in light of the access to credit and use of pesticides from other countries and scholarly literature which has confirmed the correlation between the two variables, in Uganda there are emerging aspects like climate variability, new pests and diseases. We also see a persistent challenge on access to credit, as highlighted that most of the subsistence, who make 85%, are in rural settings, as well as the increase of food insecurity concerns. So the study therefore seeks to ease the access to financial access among smallholder farmers, and also ensure the ability of farmers to use pesticides and cope up with the new pests and diseases that are emerging. Next slide. So in relation to that, we try to conceptualize the study and looking at the determinants of pesticides adoption. This addresses our first objective, which is exploratory in nature. And the assumption we have in the study is that some of the determinants could be household characteristics, as confirmed by one of the scholars or the literature reviewed. Others may involve farm level characteristics or institutional characteristics. This as the first objective. Kindly the next slide. Next slide. It leads us to the second objective, which looks at farmers' adoption of pesticides on food security. Food security, in this sense, we are using per capita food consumption, household dietary diversity score, and number of meals per day. So in relation to the study, the third objective was looking at the access to credit. And in the conceptualization of the study, we are using access to credit and try to find a moderating role between the relationship of farmers' adoption of pesticide and food security. Next slide. So to achieve this, we intend to use the Uganda National Panel Survey. It's usually conducted annually, but for the case of understanding pesticide use credit access, we adopted the two waves of 2018 and 2019 because they include aspects of inclusion, which is not included in other waves. Next slide. So to analyze our data for objective one, looking at the determinants of pesticide use, we intend to use the probit model as shown in equation 1. And in relation to pesticide use and food security, which relates with our second objective, we intended to use the equation 2. However, we discovered that the easiest way we can be able to measure food security is to run equation 2 with food security as an independent variable. But due to the endogeneity, we discovered that using an endogenous switching will be used to confirm the effect of pesticide use on food security by focusing mostly on those who adopted the use of pesticides. But furthermore, to try and establish the different effects of using pesticides, we will try to draw the distinction from first those who adopted, and we'll ignore the non-adopters as demonstrated in equation 3. In that regard, we are trying to introduce the instrument of neighborhood use of pesticide to solve the endogeneity concerns. And in relation to the moderating role of access to credit, which is the fourth of the other aspect being addressed in the study, we believe that by trying to integrate and see the different avenues of accessing credit, how they can be able to contribute to food security in the country. So we'll then disintegrate the varying sources of credit to be able to describe which kind of credit source matters most for the case of Uganda. Next slide. So our preliminary findings show that the share of households that use pesticides has been fluctuating over time. And the next one, slide. So furthermore, we realized the majority of the households use insecticides as opposed to other pesticides like rodents. Next slide. In terms of characteristics, as highlighted in relation to one of the scholars and literature reviewed, for the case of Uganda and the data which we have interacted with, we realized that most of the pesticide users are in rural communities. Majority of them are men, and they are having a less than primary level education. Next slide. And in relation to the purchase of pesticides, we come to realize that majority of them buy from private traders. However, from the data, we came to realize that the shift from private traders in district markets as opposed to an increase in local markets deprives farmers from accessing high quality pesticides in a way. As an assumption, we think we can be able to use some of these ideas in trying to make sense of the study. Next slide. So looking at the different sources of credit by households, we came to realize that the village saving groups are the most commonly adopted or used sources by most of the farmers in Uganda. However, the village saving groups are not financed a lot since they are far away from urban centers where banks are located. Next slide, please. So in relation to the findings on pesticide use and its effect on food security using the univariate t-test, we find that households that use pesticides have a significantly high food security, which is measured by meals per day. However, we also realize that there is no difference between households that use pesticides and access credit and those that use pesticides and do not access credit. So we also believe that the univariate tests are not conclusive in such a multivariant setting. So following the presentation, next slide. Following the presentation, we adopted the use of neighborhood use of pesticides as an instrument, and we seek for more opinions on how valid that could be or other alternative instruments that could best explain the study. Such other instruments could be ones that do not use or require instrumenting in the study. Next. Yeah, we'd like to thank you for your audience and thank you for listening in.
Okay, thank you, Kabanda. Thank you very much. Nicely presented, well organized, and nicely, clearly presented. Thank you. Important topic. I was struck that you started the presentation with a focus on food loss. And you talked about pre-harvest loss and post-harvest loss, right? The focus is on farmer use of pesticides and impact on various measures that you outlined. So as I see it, then the issue of post-harvest loss is really not relevant at all to your paper. Would you agree? If you're looking at use of pesticides by farmers, does the issue of post-harvest loss, do you hypothesize any impact of farmer use of pesticides on post-harvest loss? I imagine that you do not. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay, so that is just my first observation. And then my second observation is the whole issue of food loss is subject to huge empirical difficulties in measurement, right? And there are many researchers out there that would make the very strong argument that the commonly cited figures of level of food loss are likely to be overestimates. So I would I would encourage you to look at work, I believe it's by Reardon and Minton, where they have to the extent that you maintain any focus at all actually on food loss, because then I'll come back to my other comment here, but to the extent that you maintain any focus, even in the outset of the paper on food loss, please look at work by, I believe it's Tom Reardon and Bart Minton, generating estimates of food loss that are, I believe it's post-harvest, but anyway, that are far lower than what you're citing there. And then also a piece by Megan Sheehan and Chris Barrett, Chris being on this call here, excellent discussion of the whole issue of food loss. So again, I would say just if you maintain a focus on food loss, please look at least at those two papers. And perhaps I think you will probably end up modifying some of the numbers that you use and kind of the relevance. But then the other issue is that, and I'm sure you probably have this in your citation list, although I haven't seen it, but if you go back to the work by Zilberman on pesticide use, it's not about food loss, it's about avoiding damage, right? So you have kind of a potential yield, and then you have actual yield, with the gap between that driven in part by the damage that occurs when you're not effectively controlling pests, right? So it is pre-harvest loss only in the sense of not achieving the potential yield that you could achieve, right? So anyway, these are complex topics. We only have 3 minutes here, and so I would just encourage you to kind of look back at that literature as well. And let me stop and recognize Chris Barrett's question. Good presentation. Thanks. Will you address the health and environmental consequences of pesticide use? You do note the kind of rising use and indiscriminate use, and I agree with Chris that this is a huge issue. So perhaps you could respond to Chris's question. And then I also note, related to that, Christy raising an excellent issue. Given high rates of fake fertilizer in Uganda, this is now she's focusing on, is this an issue with pesticides? I would say it likely is, from what I've seen elsewhere. Just looking at yield impacts might be an important contribution to understanding this. So perhaps you can respond to those questions, then I think we're going to be out of time.
Okay, in relation to Chris, we are going to consider some of the ideas and try to advise from our policy recommendations how high quality, eco-friendly pesticides could be used, which have a less damage on the environment. So I think with guidance from Professor Milu, we'll be able to integrate this excellent idea.
Okay.
And then in relation to Cook, even the highlight of pesticides, the high rate of fake, just like highlighted in our findings, we came to realize that the people who are distributing the pesticides may have less capital, so they may be accessing poor quality pesticides which are put on the market. So somehow we would think that the fake fertilizers are partly attributed to that, but we can also build further on this idea given to make it clearer in our future presentations. I think those were the two questions that I was supposed to respond to, right?
Yeah, I think those were the two questions that were out there. And then just a final observation, Kabanda, you undoubtedly know this, of course, but the results weren't presented to show it. And this is that pesticide use is likely to vary quite substantially by crop, right? So you might see quite a lot of use of pesticides in horticultural, vegetable, especially vegetable production, and far lower use in production of field crops such as maize and so forth, right? I guess in your paper, you're abstracting from that and you're looking at simply household level use of pesticides and household level outcomes. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. That's what we
Yeah.
do.
Just that interpreting those results, then the pattern of use and non-use across types of crops and the contribution of those different crops to your various scores for your left-hand side variables will be important to consider, right? Okay,
do that.
we're at 9:30. Let me turn it back to Kelsey, and I think we will close. Kelsey.
Yeah, nothing else on my end. I just want to thank all of the presenters for great presentations. Thanks everyone for attending and for adding your thoughts and comments to the chat. Look forward to seeing where this work goes.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for your time. Thank you to the fellows. Thank you to the mentors. Wouldn't be possible without you. Thank you to Kelsey and thank you to Chris for running this program.
And
Thank you,
shout out to
everyone.
Melissa for all of her work on the back end.
Thank you very much. Exactly. Thank you, Melissa. All right. Take
All right.
care,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.